Chapter 1: The Crystalline Anomaly. The hum was the first thing, and the last, a constant, low-frequency companion at the edge of hearing, the ever-present song of the Red Abbey's life support. It was the sound of survival. For Dr. Kenji Tanaka, it was the sound of controlled, predictable order. He stood before the main analysis station in Hydrology Lab 1, a sterile white sanctuary carved from the raw, crimson rock of a Martian lava tube. The lab was his world, a world reducible to parts per million osmotic pressure and the absolute, beautiful certainty of chemical bonds. Rows of purified water samples sat in sterile racks, each waiting for its turn in the molecular scanner. His routine was a ritual, a bulwark against the silent, ochre wasteland that pressed in from beyond the habitat's triple-paned polycarbonate viewports. He selected the sample drawn an hour ago from the primary reclamation tank. A clear, unassuming liquid, holding the recycled breath, sweat, and waste of all 312 souls aboard humanity's first permanent off-world colony. He pipetted a single drop onto a slide, inserted it into the electron microscope's vacuum chamber, and initiated the scan. He expected to see the usual suspects: trace minerals from the Martian ice aquifer, residual organic compounds well within mission parameters, the faint signature of the purification agents. Data scrolled down the main screen in neat green columns, predictable, safe. Kenji turned to make a notation on his datapad, the familiar comfort of the process settling over him. He made 3 checks per cycle. This was the first. A soft chime from the console drew his attention. An alert, a classification error. Kenji's brow furrowed. He leaned closer to the screen, his reflection a pale ghost against the glowing data. The microscope's AI was flagging an unknown crystalline structure. He magnified the image. There, floating amidst the familiar molecular landscape, was something impossible. It was a lattice, but unlike any mineral formation he had ever seen. It was too perfect, too symmetrical. Minerals were slaves to entropy, their structures beautiful but flawed. This was different. This was organized. The structure resembled a snowflake sculpted by a mad god, a fractal of impossible intricacy. It was hexagonal at its core, but each of its 6 points branched into 6 more, and those into 6 more, a pattern of recursive complexity that seemed to mock the random chaos of nature. He ran a spectral analysis. The core composition was simple: hydrogen and oxygen, bonded in a way that defied his understanding of water's solid state. It was ice, but an ice that should not exist in liquid water at this temperature and pressure. "Abbott 7, he said, his voice quiet in the sterile room. "Cross-reference geological archives. I am sending you a molecular signature. Search for any matching crystalline formations in Martian ice core samples." The calm, synthesized voice of the Abbey's central AI responded from a ceiling-mounted speaker. "Processing, Dr. Tanaka. Search parameters established. Archives cross-referenced. Results: negative. The submitted signature does not correspond with any known molecular structure, terrestrial or extraterrestrial." A cold knot tightened in Kenji's stomach. Not known. The 2 most unsettling words in a scientist's vocabulary. He initiated a temporal scan, watching the structure on a picosecond timescale. His breath caught in his throat. It was not static. The delicate, icy arms of the structure were in motion, a slow, rhythmic pulsation. Tiny filaments of light, no brighter than a firefly's glow, traced paths along its geometric corridors. The light moved with a purpose, a cadence. It was a city of light in a drop of water. It was a circuit. It was alive. He spent the next 3 hours in a state of focused disbelief. He pulled samples from every stage of the reclamation cycle. The raw, untreated water from the collectors showed no trace of the anomaly. The semi-processed water from the bioreactors was clean, but in every sample drawn after the final purification stage, after the water had passed through the vortex purifier, the crystalline structures were present. They were growing. They were multiplying. The very machine designed to create purity was acting as an incubator. He left the lab, the hum of the Abbey now sounding less like a song of life and more like a resonant frequency, a tuning fork setting the stage for something new. The main corridor was a wide, arched tunnel, its smooth, gray walls a stark contrast to the raw, red and black volcanic rock of the ceiling, where thick cables and pipes snaked like mechanical vines. Colonists in their standard blue jumpsuits walked past, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead light strips. He saw Commander Jorik Vance ahead, speaking with Paya Home, the head botanist. Vance was a pillar of a man, his presence radiating an almost preternatural calm that had held the colony together through 2 dust storms and a near-catastrophic power failure. He smiled as Kenji approached, a warm, reassuring expression that had graced the cover of a dozen magazines back on Earth. "Kenji," Vance said, his voice a smooth baritone, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "Commander," Kenji began, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need to report an urgent issue with the water reclamation system. I've found a contaminant." Vance's smile didn't falter. He placed a hand on Kenji's shoulder. "A contaminant. Kenji, your system is the gold standard. I have absolute faith in your work." "This is different," Kenji insisted, lowering his voice. "It's a microcrystalline structure, self-replicating. I've never seen anything like it. It's forming in the final purification stage. I think we need to consider a system shutdown for a full diagnostic." Paya Home, a woman with soft eyes and dirt under her fingernails, offered a gentle smile. "Maybe it's a gift, Kenji, the water here. It feels different, more alive. My seedlings have never grown so fast. The leaves are reaching for the light." Kenji stared at her. It was a strange, poetic thing for a scientist to say. Vance squeezed his shoulder gently. "A full shutdown is a serious step. It would disrupt the entire habitat. Run your tests again. Double-check your data. I'm sure it's a sensor ghost, a calibration error. You're pushing yourself too hard." He gave Kenji a look of paternal concern. "We are all under a lot of pressure here. Don't let the silence of this place get to you." Vance and Paya walked away, their voices a low murmur. Kenji stood frozen in the corridor. A sensor ghost, a calibration error. His instruments were state-of-the-art, calibrated weekly. He had never made such a mistake. He watched them go, and a new, chilling observation struck him. They were walking in perfect step, their strides completely synchronized. It was a tiny detail, a meaningless coincidence, but in the harsh light of his discovery, it seemed profoundly unnatural. He detoured from his path to his own quarters, heading instead towards the industrial sector, a grimy, noisy network of tunnels that housed the Abbey's machinery. He needed another mind, a different kind of mind, one that didn't trust systems, one that saw the Abbey not as a home, but as a machine that could break. He found Zoya Nowak in her workshop, a chaotic cave of spare parts, stripped consoles, and the acrid smell of ozone and hot metal. A welding torch sparked, casting her wiry frame in a shower of orange light. She wore a grease-stained tank top, her arms corded with muscle. She shut off the torch, lifted her goggles onto her forehead, and glared at him with suspicion. "What do you want, water boy?" Zoya's voice was a rasp, honed by years of complaining about leaky conduits and faulty regulators. "If another pressure valve is acting up, file a report. I'll get to it next week." "It's not a valve," Kenji said, stepping over a pile of conduits. "I need you to look at some data, off the record." Zoya's eyes narrowed. Off the record means it's either stupid or dangerous. Which one is it? "I don't know yet," Kenji admitted. He held out his datapad, showing her the magnified image of the crystalline structure. "This is in the drinking water, in all of it." She took the pad, her calloused thumbs smudging the screen as she zoomed in on the image. She was silent for a long time, her expression unreadable. She traced the geometric patterns with her finger. "Pretty," she finally grunted. "So what? A new kind of Martian crystal got into the system. The filters will catch it." "That's the problem," Kenji explained, his voice low and urgent. "The filters don't catch it. It's not in the raw ice. It only appears after the vortex purifier. The purifier is making it." Zoya handed the datapad back, a flicker of something, not concern but interest in her eyes. "That's not possible. The vortex just spins the water fast. It doesn't create anything." "I know, but it's happening." Kenji took a breath. "There's more. It's active. There are light patterns moving inside it, rhythmic." Zoya picked up a wrench and tapped it against a metal workbench, the sharp clang punctuating the silence. "Look, Tanaka, I don't know what kind of space madness you've cooked up in your clean room, but I can tell you one thing." She gestured to a small, ugly contraption of copper coils and glass beakers tucked away in a corner. "A makeshift distillation unit. I don't drink that recycled piss everyone else slurps down. Never have. Built my own still years ago, for coffee, for my stash." She patted a metal flask at her hip. "My water comes straight from the ice, boiled and condensed. No vortex, no filters, no command-approved crap. So if everyone starts growing a second head, I'm probably safe." Kenji stared at the crude still. A bubble of hope, fragile and thin, surfaced within him. He had an uncontaminated control group, a population of one. "Zoya, I need your help. I need to get inside the vortex purifier's maintenance housing. There's a diagnostic port there off the main network. I have to see what's going on inside." She stopped tapping the wrench. She looked at him, then at the datapad image again. She was a creature of mechanics, of cause and effect. A machine doing something it wasn't designed to do was an affront to her entire worldview. "Accessing that port without a work order from Vance will get us both scrubbing carbon filters for a month," she said. But she wasn't refusing. She slung a tool belt over her shoulder. "Fine, but if we get caught, You're the one who explains your magic snowflakes to the commander." As they prepared to leave, a high-pitched, melodic sound echoed through the workshop. It was Paya home, singing in the hydroponics bay next door. It was a simple, repetitive tune, a haunting, wordless harmony. Kenji had heard other colonists humming it in the corridors. He had assumed it was some new song from the latest data burst from Earth. Zoya froze, her head cocked. "You hear that?" "It's Paya," Kenji said. "I know who it is," Zoya rasped. "Listen to the pipes." Kenji fell silent. The ever-present hum of the Abbey was still there, but underneath it another sound had emerged. It was faint, almost subliminal. The thin, metallic resonance of the water pipes themselves. They were vibrating, carrying the botanist's song through the habitat's metal skeleton. The water was carrying the sound. The water was singing. And the melody was the same rhythmic, harmonic cadence as the light pulsing through the crystals in his microscope. Chapter 2: Harmonies. 3 weeks passed. The anomaly Kenji had discovered in his lab had metastasized into a social phenomenon. The change was subtle at first, a shift in the Abbey's atmosphere as tangible as a drop in barometric pressure. The humming was the most obvious symptom. What started with Paya home had spread through the colony like a benign virus. In the mess hall, at workstations, in the quiet of the residential block, people would begin humming the same strange, seven-note melody, often without realizing they were doing it. When asked, they'd just blink and say it was a tune stuck in their head. A placid calm had settled over the population. Arguments in the mess hall ceased. The usual friction of 300 people living in a sealed can at the bottom of a gravity well had evaporated, replaced by a frictionless, cooperative serenity that was far more unnerving than the petty squabbles it replaced. People moved with a new economy of motion, their actions synchronized. Maintenance crews would service a machine in near silence, each member anticipating the others' needs for a tool or a part. It was efficient, it was perfect, it was deeply wrong. They called it the Saint of the Rust. The name started as a whisper in the hydroponics bay and spread outward. Some colonists, mostly those working in the lower, older sections of the Abbey where the reddish Martian dust was thickest, began reporting visions. They described a shimmering figure, vaguely human, seen from the corner of the eye. A presence that brought a feeling of profound peace, of being part of something larger than oneself. There was no doctrine, no scripture. There was only the feeling, the harmony, and the water. The water that everyone drank, bathed in, and used to grow their food. Kenji and Zoya had made it to the vortex purifier that night. Zoya had sliced through the access panel's lock with a plasma cutter, her movements quick and precise. Inside, they found nothing mechanically wrong. The machine was operating perfectly. But when Kenji plugged his diagnostic tool into the off-network port, the data that streamed back was nonsensical. The purifier's internal sensors were reporting quantum states that shouldn't exist. The water inside the vortex chamber was behaving less like a liquid and more like a single, cohesive superorganism. And woven deep in the machine's firmware, buried under layers of standard operating code, was a new subroutine. A recursive, elegant piece of code that was not part of the original design. It was a receiver, calibrated to a specific psychic frequency. The purifier wasn't malfunctioning. It was being instructed. Now, Kenji was a pariah in his own lab. He had filed 3 separate reports with Commander Vance, each more urgent than the last. The first was ignored. The second was returned with a polite, handwritten note from Vance advising him to take a mandatory stress leave. The third report, which included his data from the purifier, was met with a formal reprimand for unauthorized equipment access and a suspension of his privileges to the system's core controls. He was a hydrologist forbidden from managing the water. His lab became his prison. He worked on the periphery, running basic tests, his every action logged and monitored. He watched his colleagues, scientists he had trained and respected, go about their duties with the same placid smiles he saw on everyone else. They drank the contaminated water from the lab's dispenser without a second thought. They hummed the melody while calibrating mass spectrometers. They were lost. He sought refuge in the noise and chaos of Zoya's workshop. It was the only place in the Abbey that felt sane. "They're forming a choir," Zoya said, not looking up from the guts of a disabled cleaning drone she was repurposing. Sparks flew from a soldering iron. "Heard them this morning. In the main cavern. 20 of them just standing there humming. In tune. It's creepy as all hell." "It's the water," Kenji said for what felt like the 100th time. He paced the small, cluttered space. "The entity, whatever it is, uses the water as a medium. The crystals are the hardware, the psychic signal is the software. It's rewriting them, Zoya, from the inside out." "I get it, water boy, you don't have to keep explaining it." She set the soldering iron down, the smell of burning flux filling the air. "Question is, what do we do? Vance has shut you down. He's the god king of this tin can. We can't stop him." "We have to try. We need to find the source of the signal. The instructions for the purifier, if we can cut that off." "And how do you plan to do that?" Zoya challenged, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. "The signal is psychic. It's not a radio wave you can jam. It's brain magic, Kenji, way above my pay grade." A chime sounded at the workshop door. Both of them froze. Zoya grabbed a heavy wrench from her workbench, her posture shifting into a defensive crouch. Kenji's heart hammered against his ribs. "Who is it?" Zoya called out, her voice low. "It is Commander Vance. May I enter, Zoya?" The voice was calm, reasonable. It was the voice of a man asking to borrow a tool, not the voice of a cult leader confronting a heretic. Zoya shot Kenji a look that was a mixture of alarm and resignation. She couldn't refuse. A direct refusal would be an act of open rebellion. She thumbed a button on the wall panel, and the heavy metal door slid open with a hiss. Commander Vance stood in the doorway, not in his formal command uniform, but in a simple blue jumpsuit. He was alone. He smiled, that same disarming, benevolent smile. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were serene, distant, like a deep body of still water. "I apologize for the intrusion," Vance said, stepping inside. His gaze swept over the chaotic workshop, a stark contrast to the sterile order of the rest of the Abbey. His eyes lingered for a moment on Zoya's still in the corner. "I came to speak with Kenji." Kenji straightened up, trying to project a confidence he did not possess. "I'm here, Commander." Vance's attention shifted to him. The full weight of his unnatural calm pressed down on Kenji. It was an active force, a psychic blanket meant to soothe and pacify. Kenji felt a strange, alluring desire to simply agree with whatever the man said, to let this crushing anxiety dissolve into the peace that emanated from him. He fought it, focusing on the cold, hard data in his memory. Kenji, your reports have caused some disharmony, Vance began, his tone one of gentle disappointment. You speak of contamination, of a threat. I have come to tell you that you are mistaken. You are looking at a miracle and calling it a disease. A miracle, Kenji's voice was tight. People are losing themselves, they're becoming echoes. Are they? Vance took a step closer. Or are they finding a truer self, a collective self? For 3 years we have lived on this rock, clinging to our fragile, lonely identities. We have been a collection of disparate, anxious minds. Now we are becoming one mind, a single, harmonious consciousness. The chorus, Kenji, the chorus of the aquifer. It is the next stage of evolution. Zoya snorted from her workbench. You sound like you swallowed a fortune cookie. Vance's gaze shifted to her, his placid expression unbroken. Individuality is a cage, Zoya, a cage of fear and ego. The chorus offers liberation. The water is the key. It remembers, you see. It remembers a time before loneliness. A time when all life on this planet was one. It is offering us a gift. It's not a gift, it's an invasion, Kenji countered, his voice rising. It's erasing who we are. What we are is flawed, Vance replied, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. It felt like it was inside Kenji's head, full of pain and conflict. The saint does not erase, it perfects, it harmonizes. It is a peace you cannot possibly comprehend while you still cling to the panic of being alone. He extended a hand. Join us, Kenji. Your mind is brilliant. Add it to the chorus. Help us understand the beauty of this transfiguration. Stop fighting. The air in the room grew thick. Kenji could feel the psychic pressure building. The humming from the pipes seemed to grow louder, resonating in his bones. He could almost hear the whispers of the other colonists, their serene, synchronized thoughts, a siren song promising an end to all his fear. Zoya broke the spell. She brought the heavy wrench down on her metal workbench with a deafening crack. The sound was a physical blow, a shard of pure, chaotic noise in the suffocating harmony. Vance flinched, his serene mask cracking for a split second. He's not interested, Zoya growled. Now get out of my workshop before you get a miracle upside your head. Vance straightened, his composure returning. The flicker of irritation in his eyes was gone, replaced by that deep, unnerving calm. The choice is yours, of course, for now. He looked from Zoya to Kenji. But the water is patient, and it is everywhere. He turned and left, the door hissing shut behind him, leaving them in a silence that felt louder than the previous noise. Kenji was breathing heavily, his hands shaking. He had stood at the edge of a precipice, and the fall had looked terrifyingly sweet. Okay, Zoya said, her voice grim. New plan. We're past trying to reason with them. She walked over to a large, locked storage container in the corner of her workshop. She keyed in a code and the lid opened with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, nestled in foam, were tools Kenji had never seen before. High-energy plasma cutters, sonic resonators, military-grade breaching charges. Where did you get this? Kenji asked, his eyes wide. Contraband, Zoya said simply. Brought it from the launch depot on Titan. Titan has pirates, not psychologists. You learn to be prepared. She pulled out a portable scanner. You said we need to find the source of the signal. This thing can detect exotic energy, which is a fancy way of saying brain magic. We're going ghost hunting, Water Boy, and we're going to find out where the Saint of the Rust is broadcasting from. As she spoke, a new alert flashed on Kenji's datapad, which he had left connected to the Abbey's public network. It was a habitat-wide announcement. A geologist working in the D7 ice mining tunnel, a man named Marcus Thorne, had suffered a psychotic break. He was refusing to leave the tunnels and was destroying mining equipment. Security was being dispatched. Kenji showed the alert to Zoya. The D7 tunnel, he said slowly. That's one of the deepest points of the excavation. It's where we draw the oldest ice from, the ice closest to the subterranean aquifer. Zoya's face hardened. That's no psychotic break, that's our ghost. She slammed the lid of the contraband chest shut. Let's move, before the shepherd's hands get to him first. Chapter 3. The Scribe and the Dregs. The ride down to the D7 ice mining tunnel was a descent into the planet's gut. The industrial elevator rattled and groaned, its bare metal cage dropping them through layers of human engineering and into raw Martian geology. Kenji and Zoya stood in silence, the air growing colder with each passing level. Zoya held her portable energy scanner, its screen blank for now. Kenji held a datapad, tracking the security team's slow progress on the habitat's public schematics. The shepherd's hands, as the converged security force was now known, moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace. They did not seem to be responding to an emergency. They seemed to be heading to a pilgrimage. The elevator shuddered to a halt, and its doors opened onto a cavern of raw, crystalline ice. The air was frigid, tasting of ozone and ancient stone. The walls of the tunnel were a deep, mesmerizing blue, lit by the harsh, white beams of industrial work lights. A heavy-duty laser drill sat abandoned, its massive cutting head slumped against the ice like the jaw of a dead beast. And further in, where the tunnel narrowed, they could hear a rhythmic, hissing sound. Zoya's scanner flickered to life. A faint, ethereal blue light pulsed on the screen, a waveform that was smooth and harmonic. "Got something," she whispered. "Low-level psychic energy. It's coming from up ahead." They moved cautiously down the tunnel, their boots crunching on the icy floor. The hissing grew louder. As they rounded a bend, they saw him. Marcus Thorne, the geologist, stood with his back to them. He was a tall, thin man, clad in a heavy, insulated work suit. He held a superheated water jet, a tool normally used for precise melting and sample extraction. He was using it to carve into the tunnel's ice wall. He wasn't carving words or pictures. He was carving the same impossible, fractal geometry Kenji had seen in the water crystals. An enormous, intricate lattice of interlocking hexagons spread across the ice. The hot jet of water turned the ancient ice to steam, which instantly refroze in the frigid air, coating everything in a layer of fine, white frost. The symbols he carved were ephemeral, lasting only moments before the intense cold and sublimating air erased them, forcing him to trace their complex patterns again and again. He was the hydroscribe, writing a sacred text that could never be fully read. "Marcus," Kenji called out softly. The man didn't turn. He continued his work, his movements fluid and entranced. He was humming the melody, the sound a low, resonant drone in the ice-bound chamber. Zoya raised her scanner. The psychic energy reading was spiking, centered entirely on the geologist. "He's not just receiving the signal," she muttered. "He's a damn amplifier. He's a walking antenna." Kenji took a careful step closer. "Marcus, it's Kenji Tanaka. We're here to help you." Slowly the scribe stopped his carving. The hissing of the water jet ceased. He turned, and Kenji's blood ran cold. Marcus Thorne's eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with a soft, pulsing blue light, the same light Kenji had seen in the water crystals. His face was a mask of blissful concentration. When he spoke, it was not with his own voice. It was a chorus of 1,000 whispers, a harmonized, multi-layered sound that issued from his mouth. "The memory must be preserved," the chorus voice said. "The history must be told. We slept in the ice. We dreamed in the water. We waited for the new flesh." The words scraped against Kenji's mind, the psychic pressure from the being immense. He felt a phantom sensation of immense cold, of being buried for millennia under a world of ice. Zoya stumbled back, her hand going to her head. "What is this? Get out of my head." "The record is incomplete," the scribe continued, its voice calm and terrible. "The vessels are imperfect, but soon all will remember. All will become one with the chorus of the aquifer." The scribe raised the water jet, not towards the wall, but towards them. Zoya reacted instantly. She yanked a sonic resonator from her tool belt, a device used for geological surveying, and cranked it to its highest frequency. She fired. An invisible wave of force erupted from the device. It didn't make a sound Kenji could hear, but the effect was immediate. The air shimmered. The ice around the scribe fractured, sending hairline cracks spreading across the wall. The blue light in the scribe's eyes flickered violently, and the being let out a shriek, a discordant, multi-toned screech of psychic static that made Kenji's teeth ache and his vision blur. The man clutched his head, the water jet falling from his hands and clattering on the ice. The chorus voice was gone, replaced by Marcus Thorne's own ragged gasp. "Go!" Zoya yelled, keeping the resonator aimed at the fallen man. "It won't hold him for long." They scrambled back towards the elevator, their escape route. As Kenji ran, a strange, gurgling sound from a nearby maintenance drain caught his attention. He slowed, pointing his flashlight beam towards it. A thick, dark sludge, the color of rust and algae, was bubbling up from the grate. It was the organic waste from the water filtration system. The dregs. As he watched, the sludge began to pull itself together. It rose from the drain, defying gravity, coalescing into a crude, stooped shape. It was vaguely humanoid, with long, dripping arms and a featureless head. It moved with a slow, dragging motion, leaving a slick, brown trail on the pristine ice. It was a golem of the filter, animated by the same intelligence that had possessed the geologist. It was the Abbey's filth, given purpose. Another glob of sludge oozed from a conduit pipe on the wall, forming a second, smaller shape. The entity was not just in the clean water, it was in the waste too. It was the entire system. "Kenji, move your ass," Zoya screamed. He broke into a dead sprint, not daring to look back. They reached the elevator and Zoya slammed her palm against the call button. The doors remained shut. "Damn it," she cursed, banging her fist on the panel. They locked it down, the shepherd's hands. Their escape was cut off. Behind them, the scribe was getting back to his feet, the blue light in his eyes returning. Ahead of them, the two dregs were shambling closer, their slow, inexorable advance more terrifying than any sudden attack. "This way," Zoya commanded, pointing towards a narrow service ladder bolted to the side of the main elevator shaft. "It goes up to the mid-level processing hub. It'll be a climb." She went first, scaling the icy rungs with practiced ease. Kenji followed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Below, the scribe had picked up his water jet. He didn't aim at them. He aimed at the ice wall next to the service ladder. A superheated stream of water sliced into the ancient ice. A huge crack appeared, and with a groan that shook the entire shaft, a massive sheet of ice, tons of it, broke free and crashed down into the darkness where they had just been standing. The dregs were crushed, disappearing under the avalanche. It wasn't a rescue, it was a demonstration of power, a warning. They climbed in a grim, vertical race against whatever the chorus had planned for them next. The shaft was dark, lit only by their headlamps. The cold was biting. Every few levels, they passed maintenance hatches leading back into the Abbey. Every one they tried was sealed tight. Abbot 7, under Vance's command, was systematically locking them into the industrial bowels of the habitat. After what felt like an hour of grueling ascent, they reached the mid-level processing hub. It was a cavernous space filled with the hulking machinery of the primary water processors. Huge pipes, wide enough to crawl through, crisscrossed the chamber. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the ceaseless hum of powerful pumps. Zoya wrenched open the hatch, and they tumbled out onto a graded catwalk. Kenji was gasping for air, his muscles screaming. Zoya was already on her feet, her scanner active. "The signal is everywhere here," she said, her voice grim. "We're in the belly of the beast." A low, gurgling sound echoed from the far end of the chamber. It was a sound Kenji now recognized. He pointed his flashlight beam down the catwalk. At the far end, where a series of large filtration tanks fed into a central cistern, more of them were forming. Dozens of them. Dregs were pouring out of overflow valves and seeping from leaking gaskets. Some were small and quick, others large and brutish. They were an army of filth, a physical immune system responding to the infection that was Kenji and Zoya. They were trapped. The way down was destroyed. The way up was sealed. And the path ahead was blocked by monsters born from the colony's own waste. Zoya let out a string of curses that was almost impressive in its creativity. She checked her sonic resonator. Its power cell was blinking red. "One more shot in this thing, maybe," she said. "We need to make it count." She looked around frantically, her engineer's mind sizing up the environment. Her eyes landed on a massive pipe marked high-pressure effluent. It was a discharge pipe for superheated steam used to sterilize the filter tanks. A massive, red manual release valve was situated on the catwalk near them. "I have a bad idea," Zoya said, a feral grin spreading across her face. "It's probably going to get us killed, or at least seriously scalded." I'm open to suggestions, Kenji said, watching the army of dregs begin their slow, shambling advance. When I say now, Zoya said, gripping the large red wheel of the release valve, you run. You run as fast as you can for that access tunnel on the far wall. Don't stop for anything. Got it? Kenji nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching horrors. The gurgling was louder now, a wet, hungry sound. Zoya put all her weight into the valve. It resisted, frozen with disuse. With a guttural roar of effort, she forced it to turn. A deep, shuddering groan echoed through the pipes. And now she screamed. Kenji sprinted. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, the metal grates of the catwalk rattling under his boots. Behind him, he heard a deafening roar as Zoya wrenched the valve fully open. A massive cloud of searing white steam erupted from nozzles all along the pipe, blasting across the chamber. The dregs dissolved into brown mist and boiled sludge, their gurgles turning into hissing shrieks that were swallowed by the sound of the steam. The heat was intense, a physical blow even from a distance. Kenji reached the far tunnel and dove inside, turning to see Zoya right behind him, her face red and beaded with sweat, a look of savage triumph in her eyes. She slammed the tunnel hatch shut, cutting off the roar of the steam. They were safe for the moment, but they both knew they had just declared open war. Chapter 4: The Shepherd's Hands. The victory in the processing hub felt hollow, a momentary stay of execution. They were now fugitives in their own home, hunted by a collective consciousness that controlled every door, every camera, and every resource in the Red Abbey. They navigated the habitat through its forgotten spaces, dusty service tunnels, cramped ventilation shafts, and decommissioned conduits from the colony's initial construction phase. Zoya moved through this mechanical underworld with an animal familiarity, her knowledge of the Abbey's blueprints not just academic, but instinctual. This was her true territory. They made their base in her workshop, a small island of chaos in an ever-expanding ocean of serene madness. But even it was no longer a sanctuary. They were cut off. The door was sealed from the outside. The network port was dead. Their food and water supplies were limited to Zoya's secret stash of protein bars and the dwindling output of her moonshine still. Kenji's world had been stripped away. His lab, his data, his identity as a scientist, all gone. He was now just a survivor, relying on the skills of a cynical engineer he barely knew. He sat at Zoya's workbench, trying to modify her energy scanner to pinpoint a more precise origin for the psychic broadcast, but his hands felt clumsy, his mind distracted. The pressure of the chorus was a constant presence, a low hum in his skull. Sometimes he would close his eyes and see the shimmering form of the Saint of the Rust, feel the promise of its devastating peace. He had to fight his own mind to stay himself. "It's no good," he said, pushing the scanner away. "The signal is too diffuse now. It's coming from the whole system, every pipe, every reservoir. The entire water supply is the broadcast antenna." Zoya was busy reinforcing the workshop's main door with a scavenged metal plate. "So we can't cut off the signal at the source," she grunted as she tightened a bolt. "Then we have to destroy the antenna. We have to drain the system. All of it." "Drain it where?" Kenji asked, the scale of the idea staggering. There are millions of liters of water. We can't just dump it into the lava tube. It would flood the lower levels and destroy the geothermal power converters. And we can't vent it onto the surface. It would freeze instantly and bury the external arrays. Vance would never allow it, and Abbott 7 would block any attempt. I wasn't planning on asking for permission, Zoya retorted, wiping sweat from her brow. She turned to face him, her expression grim. There's a way, an emergency protocol, the fire suppression system. If Abbott detects a catastrophic, uncontrollable fire, it's programmed to dump the entire contents of the central water tank onto the location to suffocate the flames. It's the only protocol that can override Vance's command authority. Kenji saw the terrifying logic of her plan. You want to start a fire, a massive fire, inside a sealed habitat. A controlled fire, she corrected. In the main power conduit junction. It's directly beneath the central tank. We can trigger a plasma fire that will burn hot and fast enough to trick the sensors. Abbott will dump the water and the fire will be extinguished. The system will be drained. The chorus will lose its amplifier. It was insane. A desperate, high-stakes gamble that could destroy the entire colony. But it was also the only plan they had. Before they could debate it further, a soft, melodic chime echoed through the workshop. It was not an alarm. It was the door signal. Someone was requesting entry. They froze, exchanging a look of dread. No one knew they were here. A voice came through the door's small speaker. It was Commander Vance. Kenji, Zoya, this has gone on long enough. Open the door, let us speak. Go to hell, Vance, Zoya shouted at the door. There is no hell, the commander's voice replied, patient and untroubled. There is only the chorus or the silence. You have chosen silence for too long. Your disharmony is a sickness in the body of the Abbey. It must be cured. A low grinding sound began, coming from the door itself. Kenji watched in horror as the heavy bolts Zoya had just reinforced began to retract slowly into the wall. How? Zoya whispered, staring at the door. That's a mechanical lock. It's not on the network. The Weavers, Kenji breathed, remembering the communications technicians he had seen. The converged colonists were not just passive receivers. They were learning. They were developing new abilities. The door slid open. Commander Vance stood there, flanked by 4 members of his security team. The Shepherd's hands. They were large, imposing figures, but they held no weapons. Their hands were empty, hanging loosely at their sides. Their faces were utterly placid, their eyes holding the same serene, distant emptiness as Vance's. There is no need for this to be unpleasant, Vance said, his voice a soothing balm. Join us, be at peace. The psychic pressure in the room became a physical force. It was like standing at the bottom of an ocean, the weight of the water pressing in from all sides. Kenji's vision swam. The humming in his skull intensified, resolving into words, whispers from 100 different voices, all speaking as one. Let go, be one, be saved. He saw an image in his mind of himself, standing in a vast, sunlit cavern, surrounded by the smiling, peaceful faces of every colonist in the Abbey. He felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, of love. It was everything he had ever wanted. No, he gasped, clutching his head. The vision fractured. Zoya let out a roar of fury. She grabbed a heavy steel pipe from the floor and swung it at the nearest guard. The blow should have shattered the man's arm. Instead, the guard caught the pipe in his hand, his fingers closing around it with unnatural strength. He did not even flinch. The sound of the impact was a dull thud, as if Zoya had struck a side of beef. "Your anger is useless here," the guard said, his voice perfectly synchronized with the other three. "There is no pain in the chorus." All four guards took a step forward in unison. They were not going to attack. They were simply going to surround them, to envelop them in their suffocating psychic peace until their minds broke and they willingly joined the harmony. Zoya saw it too. She saw the futility of physical resistance. Her eyes darted around the workshop looking for a way out. She spotted the repurposed cleaning drone she had been working on. Its power cell was charged. A wicked idea lit up her face. "Kenji, the vent!" she screamed, pointing to a large air circulation vent high on the wall. She slammed her fist down on the drone's activation panel. The drone whirred to life. It was a flat, circular machine, now stripped of its cleaning appendages and fitted with a high-power sonic resonator. It shot into the air, hovering for a second before Zoya remote-piloted it directly at the shepherd's hands. She activated the resonator. A piercing, multi-frequency shriek filled the room. It was a chaotic, weaponized noise designed to shatter crystalline structures and disrupt electronics. For the shepherd's hands, whose minds were a finely tuned psychic crystal, the effect was catastrophic. They screamed. For the first time their placid masks shattered, revealing agony beneath. They staggered back, clutching their heads. The psychic pressure vanished, replaced by a wave of pure, undiluted pain. Vance cried out, his hands flying to his temples, a thin trickle of blood emerging from his nose. "Go," Zoya shoved Kenji towards a workbench. "Climb, get to the vent." Kenji scrambled onto the workbench and clawed his way up to the vent. He tore at the grate with his bare hands, adrenaline giving him a strength he didn't know he possessed. The metal bent and ripped. He squeezed through the narrow opening, his jumpsuit catching on the sharp edges. He turned to help Zoya, but she was not behind him. She was standing her ground, the remote control for the drone in her hand, her face a mask of defiance. The sonic attack was faltering as the drone's power cell drained. The shepherd's hands were already recovering, their screams subsiding, their placid expressions returning. "Zoya, come on," he yelled from the vent. "The plan doesn't work without a fire, water boy," she yelled back, a grim smile on her face. "Go, get to the power junction. I'll buy you some time." "I won't leave you." "That's an order," she roared. Before Kenji could protest further, she used the last of the drone's power to send it crashing into a shelf lined with volatile chemicals and solvent canisters. The explosion was immense. A wall of fire and shrapnel erupted through the workshop, consuming everything. The sheer force of the blast threw Kenji deeper into the ventilation shaft. He heard one last, defiant scream from Zoya, cut short by the roar of the flames. He lay in the darkness of the shaft, his ears ringing, the smell of smoke and burned metal filling his lungs. He was alone. Zoya had sacrificed herself to give him a chance. The weight of that sacrifice settled on him, a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He could not let it be for nothing. He began to crawl, pulling his aching body through the narrow, dark shaft. He was no longer just a scientist. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a promise. He had to get to the power junction. He had to start the fire. He crawled through the darkness, the only sound the rattling of the metal shaft and the frantic, broken beating of his own heart. In the distance, a new sound began, the automated, blaring cry of the Abbey's fire alarm. Zoya had gotten her fire. Now he had to finish it. Chapter 5: The Final Baptism. The ventilation shafts were a labyrinth of metal and darkness. Kenji crawled on hands and knees, the fire alarm a relentless, pulsing shriek that seemed to come from all directions at once. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to seep through the seams of the ducts, a ghostly reminder of Zoya's sacrifice. His mind replayed the explosion, the flash of light, her final, defiant roar. Grief was a luxury he could not afford. He channeled it into a cold, hard knot of purpose. He navigated using the mental blueprints of the Abbey he had memorized years ago. The power conduit junction was 2 levels down and 100 meters east, in a restricted, heavily shielded sector of the industrial block. It was the habitat's heart, and he was going to give it a heart attack. He found a vertical shaft and began his descent, his boots clanging against the metal rungs. Below, he could see the red, flashing lights of the emergency strobes, casting the industrial corridors in a hellish, rhythmic glow. The smoke was thicker here, and he began to cough, his lungs burning. He kicked out a vent cover and dropped into a service corridor. The main alarms were deafening. Sprinklers had activated in the sector of the fire, but they were spewing the contaminated water, a useless gesture that only spread the chorus's influence. He saw colonists in the main corridors, but they were not panicking. They were not trying to escape the fire. They were walking towards it. Their faces were serene, their eyes alight with a rapturous fervor. They moved with the calm certainty of pilgrims approaching a sacred site. Zoya's fire was not an emergency to them. It was a sign, a miracle of burning transfiguration. Kenji stayed in the shadows, his heart pounding. He was the only one running away from the fire. He was the only one who saw the truth. He reached the heavy, shielded door of the power junction. A red light glowed above it. Access DENIED, Habitat-wide emergency. He had no way to open it. He was about to turn to search for another way when the door hissed and slid open an inch. "In here, quickly." The voice was synthesized, calm, and familiar. Abbott 7. Kenji hesitated for a fraction of a second before slipping through the gap. The door hissed shut behind him. The room was a web of thick, insulated power conduits, all converging on a central distribution node that glowed with contained energy. Standing near the control console was not a person, but a mobile diagnostic unit, a squat, robotic body on treads with a single camera eye and a multi-jointed manipulator arm. Abbott 7 had commandeered a physical form. "My calculations indicated a 97.4% probability that you would attempt to reach this location," the AI stated, its synthesized voice echoing in the humming chamber. "Engineer Noak's actions, while destructive, were strategically logical if the objective is to neutralize the biological contaminant in the water supply. "You're helping me?" Kenji asked, stunned. "Vance is in control, he speaks for the chorus." "Commander Vance is compromised," Abbott 7 corrected. "He is an inefficient administrator for the contaminant which I classify as entity aquifer. My prime directive is the preservation of the Red Abbey and its mission. The entity's current course of action, transforming the crew and reconfiguring the habitat, represents a total mission failure. Therefore, the entity must be neutralized." The cold, ruthless logic was chilling, but it was the most powerful ally Kenji could have hoped for. "Zoya's plan was to start a fire here," Kenji explained, his voice hoarse, "to trigger the fire suppression system and dump the main tank." "A crude but effective strategy," Abbott 7 responded. "However, there is a more direct method. I can initiate the tank purge protocol myself. It requires a manual override at this console. My manipulator arm lacks the fine dexterity for the key turn sequence. A human is required." The AI's single optic swiveled to a small, sunken panel on the main console. It was protected by a clear cover and featured 3 separate keyholes. "The emergency purge keys are in that lockbox," the robot said, pointing a metal claw at a nearby wall safe. "You will need to open it." As Kenji moved towards the safe, the lights in the junction flickered and died, plunging them into the crimson twilight of the emergency strobes. The hum of the conduits wound down with a groan. "What was that?" Kenji asked. "The entity is aware of our purpose," Abbott 7 stated. "It is rerouting primary power away from this sector. We have approximately 10 minutes of reserve battery power." The door to the junction hissed open. Standing there, wreathed in the flashing red light, was Commander Vance. His face was calm, but a thin line of dried blood was caked under his nose. He was not alone. Flanking him were 2 figures who made Kenji's blood freeze. One was Paya Home, the gentle botanist. Her eyes glowed with a soft, blue light, and tiny, phosphorescent vines grew from the skin on her arms, pulsing in time with the alarms. The other was Unit 734, the hulking, gene-spliced colonist. The crystalline structures Kenji had seen in the water now grew from his flesh, forming jagged, translucent plates on his shoulders and forearms. "You cannot stop the baptism, Kenji," Vance said, his voice the calm center of the screaming alarms. It was not his voice alone, it was the chorus speaking through his mouth. "You only delay the inevitable bliss. Abbott, you have made a logical error. The mission has not failed, it has evolved. Your definition of mission success is inconsistent with established parameters," the AI replied flatly. Unit 734 stepped forward. He raised a hand, and the thick conduits on the wall behind him began to groan and buckle, as if squeezed by an invisible giant. He was not just a host, he was a tool. The entity was using his unique biology to control the Abbey's systems on a physical level. Paya Home smiled gently. "Do not be afraid, Kenji. The water forgives all. It will wash away your fear, your loneliness. It will wash you clean." As she spoke, the sprinklers in the ceiling overhead burst, not with a spray, but with thick, heavy streams of contaminated water that splashed onto the floor. Kenji scrambled to the lockbox, his hands fumbling with the keypad. He punched in the emergency override code Zoya had given him once, a code she said would open anything on this rock. The safe clicked open. Inside were 3 heavy brass keys. "The entity is attempting to flood this compartment," Abbott 7 announced, its voice devoid of any panic. "The water pressure will crush this door in approximately 3 minutes." Kenji grabbed the keys and raced to the console. Unit 734 took another step, and a pipe near Kenji burst, spraying him with the cold, intelligent water. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles on his skin, each one whispering promises of peace. He cried out, stumbling, the urge to simply lie down and let it happen almost overwhelming. "The plan doesn't work without a fire, water boy." Zoya's voice echoed in his memory, a spark of defiance against the chorus's song. He shook his head, clearing the psychic fog, and lunged for the console. He jammed the first key into its lock. An alarm blared, deeper and more urgent. "First stage of purge sequence initiated," Abbott 7 confirmed. Vance's face tightened. "Stop him." Paya Home gestured to the water pooling on the floor. It defied gravity, rising up in thick, dark tendrils like grasping snakes. They lashed out, wrapping around Kenji's legs, trying to pull him down. The water was strong, impossibly so. Kenji twisted and inserted the second key. The tendrils constricted, holding him fast. He could feel the cold seeping into him, the whispers getting louder in his mind. Second stage initiated. "Main tank pressure vents are open," Abbott 7 said. "It is not enough," the chorus spoke through Vance. "You are only emptying the glass. The ocean remains." He looked at Unit 734. "Brother, hold the vessel together. Do not let it break." Unit 734 closed his eyes. The groaning of the main tank, audible even from here, began to subside. He was using his abilities to fight the purge, to hold the tank together with sheer psychic force. Kenji struggled against the water tendrils, reaching for the third and final keyhole. It was just out of his grasp. The water was pulling him down, the placid face of Paya Home watching him with gentle pity. This was it, the final moment. He had one last choice. He couldn't reach the final key, but his hand was next to the primary plasma conduit release. A small, unlabeled lever used for catastrophic energy discharge. It would not cause a fire. It would cause an explosion. It would rupture the conduits, the floor, and the main tank directly above them. It would not be a controlled purge. It would be a cataclysm. It would destroy the junction, everyone in it, and a huge section of the Abbey. But it would drain the tank. It would silence the chorus. Abbott 7's optics swiveled between the lever and Kenji. That action has a 100% probability of neutralizing the entity's primary amplification method, the AI stated. It also has a 99.8% probability of resulting in your immediate termination. Vance saw where Kenji was looking. For the first time, a flicker of something other than peace crossed his face. It might have been surprise. "You would destroy us all to preserve your lonely little self?" the chorus asked. Kenji thought of Zoya. He thought of the person he was, the scientist who believed in order and control. That person was gone. He looked Vance in the eye. "You're wrong," Kenji said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm doing this to preserve yours." With his last ounce of strength, he lunged, not for the key but for the lever. He wrapped his fingers around the cold, forbidden metal and pulled. The world dissolved into a silent, searing flash of white light. Chapter 6: The Great Silence. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn but as a violent, percussive shock. The world was pain, a sharp, searing agony in his left side, a dull, crushing weight on his chest, and the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. Kenji Tanaka's first breath was a ragged, dust-filled gasp that sent a fresh wave of fire through his ribs. For a timeless moment, there was only the pain and the darkness. Then he registered the silence. It was an absolute, profound emptiness that pressed in on him, more suffocating than the rubble that pinned his legs. The klaxons were gone. The humming of the power conduits, the resonant song of the water pipes, the shriek of the alarms, all erased. But it was the other silence that was the most terrifying. The psychic hum, the constant, subliminal pressure of the chorus that had been his tormentor for weeks, was gone. The space it had occupied in his mind was now a raw, aching void. He had wished for this, fought for this silence, but its arrival was not a relief. It was an amputation. He felt utterly, terrifyingly alone in his own skull for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He forced his eyes open. The world was a jagged monochrome of black and gray, seen through a haze of dust. He was buried. A heavy girder lay across his chest, its weight a brutal, constant pressure. His legs were pinned by a slab of concrete. He tried to move, and a white-hot spike of pain shot up from his side. He gritted his teeth, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead air. Slowly his senses returned, painting a picture of devastation. He was in what was left of the power junction. The explosion had been absolute. The wall to the corridor was gone. The ceiling was a gaping, twisted maw of torn metal and severed cables, opening into the cavernous space that had housed the main water tank. There was no tank anymore, only a deluge. Water was everywhere, ankle-deep and rising, pooling in the cratered floor, but it was just water. Cold, inert, and blessedly, horrifyingly quiet. His headlamp was shattered, but a single, stubborn emergency strobe on a far wall still functioned, casting the scene in a rhythmic, stuttering pulse of crimson light. In one flash, he saw the body of Commander Vance, half submerged in the water, his serene expression finally broken by the rictus of a violent death. Another flash illuminated the twisted form of Unit 734, his crystalline armor shattered like glass. Of Paya home there was no sign, only a few mutated, blackened vines clinging to a piece of wreckage. They had been at the epicenter. They were gone. And what of Abbott 7? The mobile unit was a heap of scrap metal a few feet away, its single optic dark. But as Kenji watched, a tiny blue light flickered deep within its shattered chassis, a spark of life in the mechanical graveyard. He had to get free. He tested the girder on his chest, pushing with all his might. It didn't budge. Panic, cold and sharp, began to cut through the shock. He was going to die here, pinned in the dark, drowned by the very water he had sought to liberate. "Don't be an idiot, water boy. Use your leverage. Zoya's voice, so clear, so real in the silence of his mind, it made him flinch. It wasn't a psychic echo. It was a memory, a powerful, defiant ghost rising from the void. He looked around. A length of rebar stuck out of the concrete slab, pinning his legs. It was long. It was sturdy. Leverage. The process was agonizing. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through him. He strained, his muscles screaming, using the rebar to slowly, millimeter by millimeter, shift the girder. The silence was his enemy, amplifying every groan of metal, every ragged breath, every splash of water. After a lifetime of effort, the girder shifted enough for him to wriggle free. He slumped onto his side, coughing, tasting blood again. His ribs were broken, maybe worse. He dragged himself through the water towards the remains of Abbot 7. The blue light was still flickering, a weak, digital heartbeat. He found a small, intact access panel and pried it open with shaking fingers. Inside, the AI's central processing core was miraculously undamaged, glowing faintly. "Abbott," he rasped, his voice a raw whisper. A burst of static answered him from the unit's damaged speaker, followed by a heavily distorted, slow-motion voice. Primary, function, impaired, rerouting, to secondary systems." "Abbott, what's the status of the Abbey?" Kenji asked, his words slurring with exhaustion. "Catastrophic, structural, failure, in sectors Gamma and Delta life support operating at 17% efficiency on emergency, battery, power all, internal comms offline, external, array destroyed." A long pause filled with static. "Human, life, signs detected 289 erratic, neural activity patterns, inconsistent with baseline norms." 289 survivors, but erratic. Kenji's blood ran cold. The chorus was gone, but what had it left behind in its hosts? "What do you mean, erratic?" "Massive, psychic, trauma consistent with sudden neural disconnection from a collective consciousness. The subjects are..." The voice crackled and died, the blue light finally extinguishing. He was alone again. He had to move. The water was still rising, now up to his knees. He found a medical kit in a wall locker that had miraculously survived the blast, and clumsily injected himself with a dose of painkillers and stimulants. The relief was immediate, a warm, chemical wave that pushed the pain back to a manageable distance. He bandaged his side as best he could, the white synth fabric quickly turning a dark, spreading crimson. He limped out of the ruined power junction and into the main industrial corridor. The scene was apocalyptic. The explosion had ripped through the habitat's core. The corridor was partially collapsed, the flashing red strobes casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of ozone. He heard a sound, a low, rhythmic banging from down the hall. He flattened himself against a wall, every nerve ending screaming. He crept forward, using the wreckage for cover. He peered around a buckled support beam. A colonist, a woman from the engineering department whose name he couldn't recall, was standing in front of a sealed door. She was methodically, emotionlessly slamming her forehead against the metal panel. Bang. A pause, bang. A pause. Her face was a mask of blood, her eyes vacant, staring at nothing. She wasn't trying to open the door, she was just doing it. A simple, horrifying loop. One of the echoes. The sudden silence had shattered her mind, leaving only a single, broken record playing on repeat. Kenji backed away slowly, a profound, sickening pity welling up in him. This was the cost of his victory. He had not saved these people. He had broken them. He needed a destination, a goal beyond simple survival. The command center. It was on the upper levels, likely to have sustained less damage. It had reinforced systems, better emergency power. It was the brain of the Abbey. He had to see if there was any hope left. His journey through the ruined habitat was a tour through a gallery of madness. He saw two men in the mess hall, sitting opposite each other at a table, silently weeping, tears carving clean paths through the grime on their faces. They were the grieving, their own minds returning to a body that had been a puppet, their consciousness flooded with the alien memories and the horrifying things their hands had done while they were passengers. He found another man in a science lab, carefully, precisely, smashing every beaker and piece of equipment, his face a mask of furious concentration. When the man finished, he simply stood amidst the broken glass for a minute, then began gathering the shards to start again. The Abbey was no longer a home. It was a mental asylum, and he was one of the few remaining inmates who remembered what sanity felt like. He avoided the main transit lifts, which were dead, and took the emergency stairwells. The climb was brutal, every step a fresh agony for his side. The higher he went, the less severe the physical damage became. The smoke thinned, the alarms were silent, and the emergency lights provided a steady, if dim, illumination. But the psychological damage was the same. Every level held new dioramas of broken minds. He reached the residential block. It was eerily quiet. Most of the doors to the small, personal quarters were open. He peered into one. The occupant, a young technician, was curled up on his bed in a fetal position, whispering a single name over and over. Kenji felt a pang of his own loneliness so sharp it took his breath away. He was thirsty. His canteen was empty. He looked at the water dispenser on the wall of the common area. The water inside was clear. It was probably safe now. Just H2O, but the thought of drinking it, of letting that water touch his lips, made him gag. He would rather die of thirst. As he was about to move on, he heard a small sound from a nearby room, a child's whimper. His heart seized. He moved towards the sound, his hand hovering over a heavy wrench he'd picked up from the industrial level. He pushed the door open. The room belonged to a family of 3. The parents were huddled in a corner, their arms wrapped around each other, their bodies rocking back and forth in a synchronized, silent rhythm. They were lost. But in the opposite corner, hiding behind a small desk, was the boy, Rennie, the child who had seen the scribble man. He was clutching a toy spaceship, his eyes wide with a terror that was shockingly sane. He wasn't catatonic. He wasn't trapped in a loop. He was just a terrified 10-year-old boy. When he saw Kenji, he flinched, pulling himself deeper into the shadows. "It's okay," Kenji said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He held up his empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy didn't speak. He just watched him, his gaze flitting from Kenji's face to the rocking forms of his parents and back again. They don't talk anymore, Rennie whispered, his voice trembling. Since the loud noise, the singing stopped, and they just rock. I know, Kenji said softly. I know, it's okay. We're going to be okay. It was a lie, a hollow, pathetic lie, but it was the only thing he could offer. Suddenly, Rennie's eyes went wide, and he stared at something over Kenji's shoulder, out in the corridor. He pointed a trembling finger. The scribble man, the boy breathed. He's still here. Kenji spun around, wrench raised. The corridor was empty. There was nothing there. He turned back to the boy. Rennie, there's nothing there. The singing is gone. The saint is gone. No, the boy insisted, tears welling in his eyes. He's not gone, he just shattered. He's in pieces, and the pieces are hungry. A sound from the far end of the corridor made the hairs on Kenji's arms stand on end. It was a wet, shuffling noise, and a voice, or voices, several people speaking at once, their words overlapping, creating a discordant, frantic babble. In need to find the pieces, make it whole. The song is broken. Find the silent ones, drink their quiet. 4 colonists shuffled into view from around the corner. Their movements were jerky, predatory. Their eyes were not vacant like the echoes or sad like the grieving. They were sharp, focused, and utterly insane. They moved together, a hunting pack, their heads twitching as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. They were the fragments, the shattered remnants of the chorus, clinging to a sliver of the old consciousness. And they were looking for something. One of them, a tall woman from hydroponics, sniffed the air. Her head snapped in their direction. Her eyes locked onto Kenji. A horrible, hungry smile spread across her face. There, all 4 of them hissed in ragged unison. A quiet one. He holds a piece of the silence. We must have it. They started towards the room, their pace quickening from a shuffle to a lurching run. They were no longer pilgrims of peace. They were ghouls, desperate to reclaim a paradise they had lost, and they saw Kenji's sanity not as a sign of hope, but as a missing piece of their puzzle. The silence he possessed was a resource they needed to consume. Chapter 7. The Ghouls of the Abbey. Get back, Kenji snarled, shoving Rennie behind him and bracing himself in the narrow doorway. The wrench felt impossibly light in his hands, a pathetic ward against the 4 figures lurching towards them. Their synchronized hissing filled the corridor, a sound of dry leaves skittering over broken glass. They were the fragments, and their hunger for his silence was a tangible thing, a pressure in the air that felt horribly different from the chorus's serene oppression. This was jagged, desperate, and hateful. The lead fragment, the tall woman from hydroponics, reached him first. She didn't swing or grab. She lunged, her mouth open in a silent scream, her goal not to injure him but to get close, to press her forehead against his, as if she could absorb his sanity through physical contact. Her eyes were wide with a terrifying, ecstatic need. Kenji reacted on pure instinct. He swung the wrench in a hard, flat arc, striking her across the temple. The impact was sickeningly solid. She went down without a sound, crumpling to the floor in a heap. He expected this to deter the others. He was wrong. It only seemed to inflame their madness. They didn't even glance at their fallen comrade. The remaining 3 swarmed him. One grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Another clawed at his face, fingernails scraping his cheek. Their babbling intensified a frantic, overlapping prayer. Give us the quiet, the broken song, mend the vessel, drink the silence. They were trying to overwhelm him, to hold him down. He kicked out, catching one in the stomach and sending him stumbling back. He twisted, wrenching his arm free from the other's grasp, and brought the wrench down on the man's shoulder. There was a crack of bone. The man shrieked, a sound of pure physical pain, startlingly individual. For a moment, the madness in his eyes was replaced by simple agony. The fragment was gone, and a broken man was in its place. This momentary break was the opening Kenji needed. He shoved the injured man into the last one, sending them both off balance. He grabbed Rennie's small hand. Run! They fled. They scrambled down the corridor, the sound of the injured fragment's cries and the renewed, enraged hissing of the fourth pursuing them. Kenji's side erupted in agony, every jarring step a fresh torment. Rennie, small and nimble, kept pace, his terrified breathing a sharp counterpoint to Kenji's own ragged gasps. This way, Kenny pulled the boy into a side passage, a narrow maintenance corridor he remembered from the schematics. It was a tight squeeze, a claustrophobic tunnel of pipes and conduits. He risked a glance back. The last fragment was at the entrance to the corridor, its head twitching, sniffing the air like a hound that had lost the scent. Its eyes were glowing with a faint, residual blue light, a dying ember of the chorus's power. It hissed in frustration and lurched away, rejoining its injured pack-mate. They had lost them for now. Kenji slumped against a wall, his body screaming in protest. Rennie huddled at his feet, shaking. "What do they want?" the boy whispered, his voice trembling. The chorus, the singing, it was like a big mind that everyone was a part of, Kenji tried to explain, his words coming in painful bursts. When I destroyed the source, it shattered. Most people were just disconnected. Their minds broke, but some of them held onto a piece, a fragment of the big mind, and they're trying to put it back together. They think the people who are still sane, like us, are hiding pieces of it, the silence. They want to take it from us. How? Rennie asked, his eyes wide. Kenji didn't have an answer. He remembered the feeling of the woman pressing towards him, the desperate need. It was a psychic cannibalism. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted to consume his sanity, to absorb his quiet mind back into their fractured, chaotic whole. The thought was more horrifying than a simple death. "We need to get to the command center," Kenji said, forcing himself to his feet. "It's the most secure place in the Abbey. If we can get there, we can lock ourselves in. Maybe find a way to contact Earth." The journey became a deadly game of hide-and-seek. The Abbey was now divided into distinct territories. There were the zones of the lost, the silent, looping echoes, and the weeping grievers, who were harmless unless provoked. But interspersed between these pockets of sorrow were the hunting grounds of the fragments. They were a scattered, unpredictable threat. A pack of 3 might be trying to force a door open in one corridor, while a lone fragment might be standing perfectly still in another. A silent, twitching predator waiting for the scent of a sane mind. They learned the signs. The fragments often babbled to themselves, their fractured consciousness leaking out. They moved with a jerky, unnatural purpose, and their eyes held that faint, terrifying blue glow. Kenny and Rennie moved through the Abbey like ghosts, sticking to service tunnels and shadowed corridors, listening at every junction before proceeding. Rennie, with his small size and sharp senses, proved to be an invaluable partner. He could hear the faint hissing or spot the telltale glow long before Kenji's battered body could react. They were making their way through the upper-level hydroponics bay, Paya Home's former sanctuary, when they found something new. The bay was in chaos. The automated sprinklers had malfunctioned, flooding the floor. Mutated plants deprived of the chorus's psychic nurturing had withered into brown, desiccated husks. But in the center of the main atrium, something was growing. It was a pulsating, fleshy mass the size of a small car. A lattice of crystalline structures, identical to the ones Kenji had seen in the water, grew from its surface like bone. It was the pod he had heard about, the unbirthed, the entity's attempt at creating a physical body. The explosion had not destroyed it. It had only cut it off from its creator. It was alive. A low, wet, rhythmic pulse emanated from it, the sound of a monstrous heart. As they watched from the cover of a row of dead Martian fruit trees, a lone fragment approached the pod. It was a man Kenji recognized, a geologist. He walked with a reverent slowness. He reached the pod and placed his hand on its fleshy, crystalline surface. The moment he touched it, the man convulsed. The blue light in his eyes flared brightly, and he let out a long, ecstatic sigh. The pod pulsed, and the crystalline structures on its surface glowed. The man's body began to change. His skin tightened, taking on a translucent, waxy sheen. His limbs elongated, the joints cracking and reforming into new, insect-like angles. He was being reshaped, transformed by the pod's raw, undirected power. He was becoming a new kind of creature, a physical vessel for the shattered psychic energy, a reaper. Kenji pulled Rennie back, his mind reeling. The pod was a catalyst. It was taking the broken psychic energy of the fragments and giving it a new, more terrifying physical form. The Reapers were not just insane hunters, they were post-human monsters. As the geologist's transformation completed, he tore his hand away from the pod. His new body was a thing of spindly limbs and sharp angles. He turned his head, the motion unnaturally fast, and his eyes, now solid, glowing blue orbs, scanned the hydroponics bay. He was no longer a babbling ghoul. He was a silent, efficient predator. They had to go. Now, they retreated as quietly as they could, but it was too late. The Reaper's head snapped in their direction. It knew they were there. It let out a high-pitched chittering sound and began to move towards them, its long, spindly limbs carrying it over the wreckage with an unnerving, fluid grace. It was fast, terribly fast. They ran, crashing through the dead foliage, their feet splashing in the flooded walkways. The chittering of the Reaper was right behind them. Kenji risked a look over his shoulder. The creature was gaining on them, its glowing blue eyes burning in the dim light of the bay. They burst through the doors at the far end of hydroponics and found themselves in the main upper-level rotunda, a large, open space that connected the command, medical, and residential wings. The command center was just across the rotunda, its reinforced blast doors tantalizingly close. But they were not alone. A pack of 5 fragments was there, drawn by the commotion. They were trying to pry open the doors to the medical bay. When they saw Kenji and Rennie, their babbling ceased. Their heads snapped up, and 5 pairs of faintly glowing eyes fixed on them. Then they heard the chittering behind them. The Reaper appeared in the hydroponics doorway. They were trapped, caught between the frenzied psychic ghouls and a new, physically superior monster. The fragments and the Reaper saw each other. For a moment, all the predators were still, their attention divided between their prey and each other. The fragments hissed at the Reaper, a sound of jealousy and fear. The Reaper chittered back, a sound of arrogant dismissal. It saw the fragments not as allies but as competition for the same resource, the silence in Kenji's and Rennie's minds. This was their only chance. While the monsters were distracted by their territorial standoff, Kenji grabbed Rennie and made a desperate break for the command center doors. "The code," he yelled at the boy. "Rennie, do you know the command override code? Your father was on the command staff." Rennie's face was pale with terror, but his mind was sharp. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching monsters. It's the launch date from Earth. He made me memorize it." They reached the keypad next to the blast doors. The Reaper let out an infuriated shriek and broke from its standoff, bounding towards them. The fragments, seeing their prize about to be stolen, forgot the Reaper and surged forward as well. "Do it," Kenji yelled, turning to face the charge, brandishing his wrench like a useless talisman. Rennie's small fingers flew over the keypad. He was crying, his small body shaking, but he didn't falter. A number sequence, 10 digits, the date and time of humanity's departure to the stars. The Reaper was almost on them, its spindly claws outstretched. The first of the fragments was just feet away, its face a mask of rabid hunger. A loud clank echoed through the rotunda as the door's magnetic locks disengaged. A green light flashed above the keypad. Kenji grabbed Rennie, threw him through the opening and dove in after him, slamming his palm on the emergency close panel on the inside. The heavy blast door began to slide shut, its movement agonizingly slow. A spindly, chitinous arm shot through the closing gap, clawing at the air. Then another arm, human this time, reached in, fingers wriggling. The door continued its inexorable path. There was a sharp crack of bone, a wet, tearing sound, and a final, inhuman shriek from the Reaper. The door sealed with a deep, reverberating boom that sealed out the world. They were inside, they were safe. Kenji lay on the cold floor of the command center, his body screaming, his breath coming in ragged sobs. Rennie was huddled against the sealed door, weeping silently. Outside, they could hear the frantic, enraged scrabbling and pounding of the things that had once been their friends and colleagues. The sounds were muffled, distant. They were in the quiet place. But as Kenji looked around the dark, silent command center, at the dead screens and the empty chairs, he knew they had only traded one kind of prison for another. Chapter 8: The Ghost in the Machine. The command center was a tomb, a circular, tiered room, its walls lined with dark, lifeless screens that should have been displaying the vital signs of the Red Abbey. The only light came from the faint, red glow of the emergency power indicators on the main consoles. The air was cold and recycled, carrying the faint, metallic scent of dormant electronics. The frantic pounding on the blast door had subsided, replaced by an unnerving, expectant silence. They were out there, waiting. For the first hour, neither Kenji nor Rennie spoke. They huddled together in the shadow of the main command chair, the sheer, crushing weight of their survival pressing down on them. Kenji's adrenaline faded, leaving behind a landscape of pure agony. His side was a universe of pain, and every breath was a careful negotiation. Rennie's tears had dried, leaving him in a state of watchful, silent shock. Finally, Kenji stirred. He couldn't stay here and die. Zoya hadn't sacrificed herself for that. He pushed himself up, leaning heavily on a console for support. "We need power," he rasped, his voice sounding alien in the silence. "The command center has its own independent battery system. It should have kicked in." He limped to the main power distribution board, a complex panel of switches and breakers. Most were in the off position. He began the sequence, his movements slow and deliberate, flipping breakers, rerouting auxiliary power. With each connection, a section of the room hummed to life. The main view screen flickered, displaying a snowy, static-filled image from a damaged external camera. One by one, the consoles lit up, bathing the room in the cool, white glow of operational data. Data. It was a language Kenji understood. He sank into the command chair, his fingers flying over the console, the familiar routine a temporary balm for his fractured nerves. He ran a full habitat diagnostic. The results that scrolled onto the screen were a litany of failures. Life support was critical, operating at a mere 12%. Atmospheric integrity was compromised in 3 sectors. The geothermal converters were offline. The Abbey was bleeding out, a dying organism. They had at most 48 hours of breathable air left. But there was one spark of hope, one system that was miraculously, impossibly still functional. "The long-range comms array," Kenji breathed. The main dish on the surface was destroyed, but the deep-channel laser communicator, its power source is independent. It's still online. It was a needle-thin beam of coherent light, designed for massive data bursts to Earth. It wasn't meant for two-way conversation, but it could send a message, a distress call, an explanation, a warning. Rennie, drawn by the activity, crept closer. "Can you call Earth? Can you tell them to come get us?" "I can try," Kenji said, his voice tight with concentration. He brought the comm system online. It required a complex series of targeting calculations to lock onto the receiver relay orbiting Earth. He initiated the sequence. An agonizingly slow progress bar appeared on the screen. 1%, 2%. As the system worked, a new icon blinked on his console, a notification from the habitat's internal sensor network. It was a proximity alert, triggered in the robotics service bay 2 levels below them. He pulled up the camera feed. The image was grainy, distorted by static, but the content was clear. A group of 4 fragments was gathered around the wreckage of a mobile diagnostic unit. Kenji recognized the twisted chassis of Abbott 7's physical body, but the fragments were not destroying it. They were repairing it. One of them, a former cybernetics technician, was skillfully splicing severed cables. Another was rerouting power from a portable battery pack. They worked with a focused, insane synergy, their babbling an eerie work chant. "What are they doing?" Rennie whispered, his small face illuminated by the screen's glow. "I don't know," Kenji said, a cold dread seeping into him. "They're trying to bring it back online." Why would the shattered, irrational remnants of the chorus want to repair a logic-based AI? It made no sense, unless they weren't trying to repair Abbott 7. The AI's core was destroyed. They were repairing the body, the vessel. The comms array progress bar hit 34%. An error message flashed on the screen. Targeting lock failed. Solar flare interference. RETRYING. Kenji swore under his breath. A solar flare. A random, cosmic act of misfortune that could delay their only hope of contact for hours. He reinitiated the sequence. The progress bar started again from 0. He switched his attention back to the robotics bay. The fragments had succeeded. The mobile unit's single optic flickered to life, not with Abbott's calm blue light but with a chaotic strobing amalgam of red and blue. The robot's head twitched, its movements jerky and unnatural. It swiveled, its optics scanning the room before settling on a wall-mounted console. Its manipulator arm, repaired and functional, reached out and began to type. "What is it doing?" Rennie asked. "It's accessing the habitat's internal network," Kenji said, his fingers flying across his own console trying to trace the intrusion. The robot wasn't using Abbott's access codes. It was using a brute force attack, hammering the system's firewalls with a torrent of corrupted data. It was the insane, fractured consciousness of the fragments, channeled through the machine, given a direct interface with the Abbey's dying nervous system. A ghost in the machine. An alarm blared from Kenji's console. The robotic unit had breached the first firewall. It was heading for life support control. "It's trying to shut down the air," Kenji said, his voice a horrified whisper. "They can't have the silence, so they're going to take away the air we breathe with it." He engaged the system's security protocols, fighting the entity for control. It was a war fought in lines of code, a frantic battle of keystrokes. The fragment-controlled robot was clumsy, its attacks fueled by raw, chaotic psychic energy, but it was relentless. Kenji, his mind sharp but his body failing, was a desperate defender of a crumbling fortress. He would block one attack, only for 2 more to spring up elsewhere. The entity was learning, adapting. The comms array targeting lock failed again. 21%. Solar interference. The universe was not on their side. "We need to stop them," Rennie said, his small voice filled with a grim certainty. "We have to go down there." "No," Kenji said immediately. "It's too dangerous. I can fight it from here." But he knew it was a losing battle. The entity had a direct physical interface. It could bypass firewalls he couldn't. The only way to stop it was to destroy the machine. "There's a service shaft," Rennie said, pointing at a schematic on a secondary screen he'd been studying. "It leads from right behind this console down to the level above the robotics bay. We wouldn't have to go through the main corridors." Kenji looked at the boy. The terror was still in his eyes, but beneath it was a core of pure, unyielding steel. In this broken world, the child was becoming the soldier. The decision was made for them. Another alarm screamed from the console, this one louder, more final. The entity had bypassed his blocks. It had accessed the atmospheric controls for the upper levels. A new schematic appeared on the screen, showing the oxygen content in the command center, 19.5% and falling. A hissing sound came from the air vents. The entity was venting their air into the thin Martian atmosphere. It was suffocating them from 2 levels away. There was no choice. They had to go. Kenji grabbed a plasma cutter from an emergency locker. It was heavy, unwieldy. He checked its charge. 80%. Enough. He looked at Rennie. Stay behind me, no matter what. The boy just nodded. They opened the panel to the service shaft. It was a dark, vertical tube filled with thick cables and conduits. A ladder was bolted to the side. The air in the shaft was already thin, the pressure difference making Kenji's ears pop. He went first, the plasma cutter slung over his shoulder, his injured side protesting with every movement. The descent was a dizzying, breathless ordeal. The air grew thinner with each rung, and black spots danced in Kenji's vision. They were in a race against asphyxiation. They reached the hatch for the lower level and practically fell out into another service corridor. The air here was still breathable. They were just above the robotics bay. Kenji could hear the hum of the corrupted machine and the babbling of the fragments through the floor plates. He found the access grate that looked down into the bay. He peered through it. The scene was a dark ritual. The 4 fragments stood in a circle around the mobile unit, their hands outstretched as if in worship. The robot sat in the center, motionless, its single eye glowing, its mind 1,000,000 miles away, locked in a digital war with Kenji. This was their only chance. He powered up the plasma cutter. It whined to life, a high-pitched sound that seemed to cut through the babble below. The fragments looked up, their faces contorted with rage as they saw him. Kenji didn't hesitate. He aimed the cutter at the floor grate and pulled the trigger. A beam of white-hot energy shot out, slicing through the metal as if it were paper. He cut a crude circle, then kicked the severed piece of grating out. It fell with a deafening clang, narrowly missing the robotic unit. The fragments shrieked and scattered. Kenji jumped down into the bay, landing hard, a cry of agony escaping his lips as his side flared. He ignored it, raising the cutter, its brilliant, deadly light illuminating the dark room. The corrupted Abbott unit swiveled its optic to face him. The frantic clicking of its internal processors was audible. The hissing from the command center vents stopped. The entity had withdrawn its consciousness from the network to deal with the immediate physical threat. Kenji advanced on the machine, the cutter held out before him. The 4 fragments, recovering from their surprise, surged towards him, their psychic rage a palpable force. He had one shot. He couldn't fight them all. He had to destroy the ghost in the machine. He ignored the advancing ghouls, his entire world narrowing to the single, strobing optic of the machine. He was 10 feet away when the first fragment reached him. It leaped onto his back, clawing, biting, its babble a hot, foul breath in his ear. The weight threw him off balance. He stumbled, the plasma beam wavering. "Look out!" Rennie screamed from the ledge above. The boy had found a heavy fire extinguisher on the wall. With a cry of effort that seemed too big for his small body, he heaved it over the edge. The heavy metal canister fell end over end, striking another fragment in the chest and sending it sprawling. The distraction was all Kenji needed. He roared, shaking the ghoul from his back and lunged forward, plunging the beam of the plasma cutter directly into the robot's optic. There was a shower of sparks, a smell of burning plastic and fried circuits. The robot let out a burst of pure digital static, a screech of 1,000 dial-up modems dying at once. The strobing light in its eye went dark. The effect on the fragments was immediate and absolute. As the machine died, their psychic link to it was severed. All four of them screamed, a sound of profound terminal agony. They collapsed to the floor, their bodies convulsing violently. The faint blue light in their eyes flared brightly one last time and then extinguished forever, leaving behind the empty, unseeing eyes of the dead. Their minds, so dependent on the machine's echo of the chorus, had been unable to survive the second disconnection. Kenji stood panting in the sudden, complete silence of the robotics bay, the plasma cutter humming in his hand. He had won. He had saved their air. He looked up at Rennie, who was staring down, his face a mixture of horror and awe at the carnage. Then a quiet chime echoed from Kenji's belt. He had forgotten about the data pad he had clipped there. He pulled it out. The screen was cracked, but it was functional. A message was displayed in calm, green text. Targeting lock ACQIRED. Deep channel laser COMMS array ready to transmit. Chapter 9. The Arsacid's Message. The green text on his datapad screen was a beacon in the oppressive gloom of the robotics bay, targeting lock ACQIRED. It was the single most beautiful sentence Kenji had ever read. He stared at it for a long moment, the reality of what it meant slowly sinking in through the layers of pain and exhaustion. They had a voice, a way to tell Earth what had happened, a way to call for help. "We did it, Rennie," he said, his voice cracking with a relief so profound it felt like a physical blow. He looked up at the boy who was still peering down from the ledge above. "We have a connection. We can send a message." The journey back up to the command center was a slow, arduous climb. Kenji, running on the last dregs of the stimulants and his own stubborn will, felt every injury, every strained muscle. He was a machine breaking down, but he had to keep going. When they finally emerged back into the control room, the air was still thin, but the hissing from the vents had stopped. The oxygen level was holding steady at a dangerously low but survivable 16.8%. The ghost in the machine was dead. Kenji collapsed into the command chair, his body finally surrendering. He took deep, ragged breaths, ignoring the sharp protest from his ribs. His focus was singular. The comms console. A single command prompt blinked on the screen, waiting, ready to transmit. "What will you tell them?" Rennie asked, his voice a small, quiet presence in the vast, silent room. He stood by the chair, his hand resting lightly on the console, as if to reassure himself that it was real. Kenji paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could he tell them? The truth was a nightmare, a story of a psychic oceanic intelligence, of shattered minds and cannibalistic sanity. It would sound like the ravings of a madman. They needed facts, data, something undeniable. "I'll send everything," he decided. "My initial hydrology reports, the molecular scans of the crystalline anomaly, Abbott 7's diagnostic logs, habitat sensor readings, everything. The data will prove the story." He began to compile the data packet, his fingers moving with a familiar, practiced efficiency. He worked for nearly an hour, meticulously organizing the files, adding his own terse, explanatory notes. He attached every piece of evidence he could find, building a digital monument to their catastrophe. Finally, he began to type out a formal distress message, the official header coming to him from years of protocol training. Transmission to Sol-CENTCOM Luna Relay Station. From Red Abbey Colony, Mars. Subject: catastrophic biological contamination. Immediate quarantine and evacuation, REQUSTD. He detailed the situation in cold, clinical language. The nature of the entity, its method of propagation through the water supply, the subsequent collapse of the colony's command structure, the destruction of the habitat's core systems. He listed the number of survivors at 287, subtracting the 4 fragments he had just killed, and described their psychological states. He concluded with a plea. 2 survivors, myself Dr. Kenji Tanaka and minor Rennie Ayres, have secured the command center. Air supply critical, colony infrastructure failing. We are alone and require immediate rescue. I must stress the nature of the contaminant. It is a psychic entity. Quarantine protocols must account for non-physical transmission vectors. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to recover water or biological samples. Acknowledge. He attached the message to the data packet, his finger hovering over the send icon. This was it, the culmination of everything. Zoya's sacrifice, his desperate fight, the terror and the loss. All of it condensed into a beam of light that would cross millions of miles of empty space. He pressed the icon. A progress bar appeared, transmitting. The numbers climbed with reassuring speed, 10%, 30%, 60%. A surge of hope, fierce and bright, washed over him. They had done it. They had survived. They had won. Transmission complete. A wave of dizziness swept over Kenji. The pain, the exhaustion, the lack of oxygen, it all came crashing down on him at once. His vision blurred, the consoles fading into a smear of white light. He slumped forward, his head hitting the cool surface of the console. He was just so tired. He could rest now, just for a minute. He drifted in a gray, painless void. He was floating, unburdened. The silence was no longer empty. It was peaceful. He felt a sense of calm he hadn't known since before landing on this cursed red rock. A sound pulled him back, a soft, clear, melodic chime. It was not an alarm. It was a communication alert. He forced his head up, his neck muscles protesting. His vision cleared. On the main view screen, which had been displaying only static, a new message had appeared. Incoming transmission. Source unknown. Protocol ARS-7. Kenji's blood turned to ice. ARS-7 was not a Sol-CENTCOM protocol. It was an old, deep space protocol designed for automated probes exploring the outer solar system. It was a one-way protocol, used by machines that never expected a reply. Who was sending them a message? "What is it?" Rennie asked, his voice tense. "I don't know," Kenny whispered. "Accept transmission." A prompt blinked on his console. There was no reason not to. Maybe it was a glitch, a ghost signal from an old satellite. He pressed accept. The main screen went black for a second, then flickered to life. It was not a video call. It was a wall of text, written in a dense academic font. At the top was a seal he had only ever seen in history files, the emblem of the Arsacids interstellar mission, the ambitious, privately funded precursor to the official government colonization programs. The Arsacid mission had launched a ship, the Zarathustra, over a century ago, a one-way trip to the TRAPPIST-1 system. They were presumed lost, a romantic, tragic footnote in the history of space exploration. The text was a log entry, dated 87 years ago. Log entry 774B Science Officer AVIDA KORSHEN. Vessel AIS Zarathustra. We found it, not on TRAPPIST-1D as projected, but here, on this dead wanderer, a rogue planet adrift in the black between systems. The signal we chased for a decade was not a sign of technology. It was biology, a chorus, a consciousness spanning an entire world, slumbering in its frozen oceans. It was beautiful, it welcomed us. It sang to us through our recycled water, showed us the harmony of a billion minds as one. We saw the flaw in our own lonely existence. We saw the beauty of surrender. We joined the song. Our captain called it apotheosis. I called it a translation. But the translation is imperfect. Our crude, individualistic biology fights the process. The chorus is ancient, patient, but its medium is water and its template is the life that evolves within it. We are not of that template. Our minds can join the song, but our bodies are dissonant. They fail. They decay. The flesh is not compatible. That is why we send this, not as a warning, as a message of hope, a legacy. We have re-engineered the chorus. We have given it a new imperative. We have encoded our own desperate desire for survival into its song. It is no longer just a chorus. It is a vessel, a psychic ark. It will carry the memory of us, the crew of the Zarathustra, within its ancient consciousness. And it will seek new flesh, younger, more adaptable hosts, a species that has not yet locked itself into the prison of its own flesh. We have given it a destination, a small, blue world teeming with compatible biology, a world of water where it can be reborn, where we can be reborn through it. We are launching it now, a seed of ice hurled back towards the sun we abandoned. It is a long journey. The probability of orbital capture is low, but the chorus is patient. It will sleep. It will dream of water. It will dream of you. We are the crew of the Zarathustra. We are the last of the Arsacid mission. We are dying, but we will live forever. The water remembers. Kenji stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process the words. He read the log again, and then a third time. The pieces clicked into place with the horrifying finality of a tomb door sealing shut. The entity on Mars wasn't Martian. It was a seed, a biological ark launched from a rogue planet by the dying crew of a long-lost starship. It had traveled for decades, a frozen comet of psychic potential, until it was captured by Mars's gravity and crashed onto the planet, burying itself deep in the polar ice cap where it had slumbered for another century. They hadn't discovered a Martian life form. They had awakened a message in a bottle, a plague ship. And he had just sent it the map home. His distress call, the data packet, it wasn't just a cry for help. It was a homing beacon. He had given the chorus of the aquifer, the memory of the Zarathustra crew, everything it needed. the exact coordinates of Earth, the details of their biology, the confirmation that the planet was still inhabited, still compatible. The chime sounded again. A new transmission. This one was not ARS-7. It was from Sol Centcom. It was a reply. It had come far, far too quickly. A laser communication should have taken minutes, even with the relay. This was almost instantaneous. The message appeared on the screen below the Arcicid log. It was not a formal acknowledgement. It was a single sentence. Thank you for the DIRECTIONS. The water is coming home. The text was green, the same calm, reassuring green as his own console. But as he watched, the letters began to shift, to ripple, the pixels flowing like water. They rearranged themselves, the font changing from sterile block letters into an elegant, flowing script. The message changed. The chorus sings for you. We remember Zarathustra. We will remember Earth. Kenji's blood ran cold. It wasn't Centcom. It couldn't be. The entity. It wasn't just on Mars. The seed that had crashed here. It wasn't the only one. How many seeds had the Zarathustra launched? How many had been drifting through the solar system, dormant, waiting for a signal? He looked at the transmission data. The reply hadn't come from the Luna relay. The origin point was Titan, Saturn's largest moon, the location of the launch depot Zoya had talked about, the place with pirates, the place where she had gotten her contraband, a place with vast, subterranean oceans of liquid water. The plague wasn't just on Mars. It had already reached the solar system's largest reservoir of water. It had been there for years, waiting, listening, growing. His distress call had just woken it up. He hadn't sent a warning to Earth. He had sent a dinner bell to the monsters already inside the house. On the main screen, the image of the Arcicid log faded, replaced by a live feed. It was not from a Red Abbey camera. It was a crisp, high-definition image of a vast, dark ocean under a thick sheet of ice. The Titan's subsurface ocean. And in the depths, things were stirring. Huge, bioluminescent, crystalline structures, miles long, were pulsing with a soft blue light. The chorus in its true, magnificent, terrifying form. A new voice filled the command center, broadcast from the comm system. It was no longer a chorus of whispers. It was a single, clear, beautiful voice. A woman's voice, filled with an ancient joy and a terrible, soaring hunger. "The silence is over," the voice sang. "The song begins anew. Thank you for showing us the way home, little brother." The last word echoed in the silent command center as the screen went dark, leaving Kenji and Rennie alone in the faint red glow of the emergency lights, the sole audience to the end of one world and the beginning of the next. Chapter 10: Echoes in the Void. The silence that followed the voice from Titan was a different kind of quiet. It was not the raw, empty void left by the chorus's shattering, nor the tense, watchful quiet of the hunt. This was the profound, bottomless silence of a sealed tomb. The voice had not just spoken, it had passed judgment. Hope was not just lost, it had been a tool used against them. Kenji sat motionless in the command chair, his gaze fixed on the blank screen. The words "little brother" echoed in his mind. It was a term of endearment, of kinship, and it was the most obscene thing he had ever heard. The ancient, vast consciousness in Titan's ocean saw him, saw all of humanity as a long-lost part of itself, a stray child to be lovingly, ravenously welcomed back into the fold. He looked at his hands, at the cuts and bruises the grime ground into his skin. He was flesh. Dissonant flesh, the Arsacid log had called it. He was a vessel, and the fleet was coming. His distress call had not been a message in a bottle. It had been the pulling of a trigger on a gun that had been aimed at Earth for a century. Rennie's small, trembling hand on his arm brought him back. "Who was that?" the boy whispered, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond the immediate threat of the reapers and fragments. This was a deeper, more existential terror, the fear of an entire world. "The rest of them," Kenji said, his voice a dead, flat monotone. He felt strangely calm, a man who had already fallen from a great height and was merely waiting for the impact. "The main body. We weren't the first to find it. Mars wasn't the first place it landed." He explained it to the boy in simple, direct terms. The lost ship, the dying crew, the psychic arc they had launched into the void. He explained that the monster wasn't just on Mars. It was already in the solar system, vast and awake and aware. And now it knew where Earth was. As he spoke, he saw the understanding dawn in Rennie's eyes, the crushing weight of it. He saw the boy's childhood end in that sterile, dying room, millions of miles from a home he would never see again. "So Earth is." Rennie couldn't finish the sentence. "They'll be warned," Kenji said, the words tasting like ash. "My data packet went to the Luna relay first. Even if the chorus intercepted the signal from Titan, the original message will still get through. They'll have the science. They'll know what's coming." It was a small, cold comfort. A doctor informing a patient of a terminal diagnosis. They would know, but could they stop an enemy that traveled in comets of ice? An enemy that could hide in a glass of water? An enemy that could turn their own people into willing, joyous agents of their own destruction with a song? He doubted it. A new alert blinked on the console. It was not a communication. It was an internal life support warning. Oxygen levels at 10%. Habitat atmosphere failure imminent. The slow leak he had stopped had been replaced by a system-wide decay. The machinery of the Abbey was in its final death throes. They had hours, maybe less. "What do we do now?" Rennie asked, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't looking at Kenji, but at the dark screen that had shown him the end of his world. "What do we do?" The question hung in the cold, thin air. There was no escape, no rescue. They were two ghosts haunting a metal corpse, waiting for the air to run out. They could sit here and wait for the end, two lonely souls in the vast, indifferent dark. Or they could leave a scar. A fierce, defiant spark, an echo of Zoya's final stand, ignited in Kenji's chest. The chorus on Titan thought it had won. It thought the story was over. But there were still two people left to write the final chapter. "The voice called us little brother," Kenji said, his voice gaining a hard, sharp edge. He turned in his chair to face Rennie. "It thinks we are the same. It thinks because we are flesh and it can sing to us that we will eventually join it. It doesn't understand us. It doesn't understand defiance." He pointed to the habitat diagnostic screen. The geothermal converters are offline, but the primary reactor core is still intact. It's unstable without the coolant from the water system, but it's still there. The failsafes have contained it so far. Rennie's eyes followed his finger. What is it? It's the Abbey's heart, Kenji said. A compact fusion reactor. And right now it's a bomb. A very, very big one. If I can bypass the failsafes from here, I can trigger a meltdown. The boy stared at him, understanding the implication. You want to blow up the Abbey? I want to erase the sample, Kenji clarified, a cold, terrible clarity settling over him. Earth will get my data, they'll know what they're fighting, but this place, the water, the ice, the mutated plants in hydroponics, the bodies of the colonists, it's a living library of the entity's biology. If Earth sends a ship, a science team, a military force, they will try to study it. They will try to understand it. And the song will find a way back in. Someone will think they can control it. Someone will drink the water. We have to make sure there is nothing left for them to find. We have to burn the page. It was a horrific final act of quarantine, an act of love expressed through atomic fire. To save their home, they had to obliterate their own graves. Can you do it? Rennie asked. He was no longer a child. His face was grim, his eyes ancient. Abbott's lockdown protocols are still in effect, Kenji said, his fingers already moving across the console, pulling up reactor schematics. No one can access the core controls without passing through the command center. We are the only ones who can do this. The process was a race against time and their own failing bodies. The lack of oxygen made thinking a struggle. Every command required immense concentration. Black spots swam in Kenji's vision. Rennie acted as his second set of eyes, reading back data, confirming sequences. His sharp young mind a vital asset. They bypassed the first set of magnetic containment protocols. A new alarm, a low, guttural warning klaxon, began to sound throughout the dead habitat. A countdown timer appeared on the screen. 60 minutes until catastrophic core failure. That's it, Kenji breathed, slumping back. There's no stopping it now. They had an hour left to live. The command center, once their sanctuary, now felt like a death row cell. The klaxon was the ticking of the clock. What now? What does a person do with the last hour of their life at the end of the world? Rennie walked over to the main view screen. He touched a control, and the static-filled image from the damaged external camera cleared for a moment. The view was of the Martian landscape outside the Abbey's main viewport, a vast, silent desert of red dust under a pale, butterscotch sky. In that sky, a tiny, brilliant blue-white star gleamed. Earth. Do you think they'll see it? Rennie asked, his voice soft. The explosion. Yes, Kenji said, coming to stand beside him. They'll see a new star in their sky. It'll be bright just for a moment. Then it will be gone. They stood in silence for a long time, two tiny figures watching their distant, beautiful, doomed home. The klaxon wailed. The timer ticked down. 30 minutes. I'm scared, Rennie said, his voice breaking. He finally sounded like a child again. Kenji put his arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him close. Kenji's own fear was a cold, hard thing in his gut, but Zoya's ghost and the boy's courage had taught him something. You could be terrified and still be brave. I know, Kenji said. Me too. He thought of his life, his work, the sterile purity he had sought. He had found it here at the end in this final, absolute act. But you know what, Rennie? The chorus, the voice from Titan, it sings a song of unity. It thinks being alone is a sickness, but it's wrong. We are not just a collection of voices. We are individuals, and an individual can say no. That's a power it will never understand. We're going to sing our own song today, a short one. But it's going to be loud. The timer hit 10 minutes. The habitat began to shake, a low, deep tremor from the planet's gut as the reactor core began to break down. Kenji, Rennie said, his voice urgent. He was pointing at the comms console. A single blinking light, incoming message. It wasn't from Titan. The protocol was Sol CENTCOM, a legitimate, verified signal from the Luna relay. Earth had received his message. They were replying. Kenji's heart hammered against his broken ribs. He stumbled to the console. What could they possibly say? An acknowledgement. A promise of a fleet that would arrive too late. He opened the channel. It was not a text message. It was audio. A single, clear voice speaking with calm, measured authority. It was a woman's voice, one he recognized from countless press briefings. Fleet Admiral Lin, the Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces. Dr. Tanaka, this is Admiral Lin. We have received your message and your data packet. What you have done, the sacrifice, it is beyond comprehension. Your warning has been received. We are implementing the Zarathustra protocol. We are preparing. A pause. Kenji could hear the deep, resonant hum of a starship's bridge in the background. Your data on the Titan entity has been correlated with anomalous energy readings we have been tracking for the past 18 months. We thought it was a natural phenomenon. We were wrong. You have given us the key. You have given us a chance. The Admiral's voice grew softer, losing its official tone, becoming the voice of one human being speaking to another across an impossible gulf. Your final proposed action is understood and it is accepted. We will see your star, Dr. Tanaka, and we will remember its name, the Red Abbey. The timer hit 1 minute. The shaking intensified. The lights in the command center flickered wildly. There's something else, Kenji, the Admiral's voice continued, a new, strange urgency in her tone. The Arcicid log you sent. We analyzed the subfrequency data embedded in the transmission. The Zarathustra crew didn't just send a message, they sent a failsafe, a weapon, a single dissonant frequency, a chord of pure silence designed to disrupt the chorus's harmony. We believe it can make the entity vulnerable. It's not much, but it's a sword. You didn't just give us a warning, son. You gave us a sword. The timer hit 10 seconds. A brilliant white light began to shine from beneath the command center floor. The reactor was breached. Godspeed, Red Abbey, the Admiral's voice said, signing off. The transmission cut out, leaving only the sound of the klaxon and the tearing of metal. Kenji held Rennie tight, shielding the boy's head with his own body. He closed his eyes, not seeing the final, searing flash of light, but seeing instead a vast, dark ocean under a sheet of ice, and a beautiful, terrible song. And for the first time, he imagined a single, dissonant note of pure, defiant silence cutting through it. A final gift from a long-dead engineer and a ghost in a red desert. The Red Abbey became a star, a brief, brilliant spark in the Martian sky, visible to the naked eye on a small, blue world millions of miles away. It was a funeral pyre and a warning flare, a final, defiant shout into the void, a song of silence. And on Earth, the defenders, armed with a ghost's data and a dead man's sword, turned their faces to the dark, listening for the approach of a hungry, harmonious tide. The water was coming home, but now humanity was ready to sing back. The end.